The apparel and textile industry in Bangladesh employs over 4 million workers, the majority being women. The mandatory human rights due diligence was introduced in response to the persistent human rights concerns, including poor working conditions, low wages, and exploitations of workers. A greater industry awareness on the importance of HRDD is instrumental to its success. The HRDD can only be effectively implemented with a collective concerted effort from the Bangladesh government, international organizations, and companies operating in the industry. Now we are moving into the last plenary session of this forum, mandatory human rights due diligence. I would like to request Dr. Bernard Spanier, Deputy Head of Delegation of the European Union in Bangladesh, to please come up to take his seat on stage. I would also like to request Mr. Faiz Murshid Qazi, Director General, Economic Affairs Wing, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh, to come up as well. I would like to request Ms. Lina Khan, Labor Attaché, U.S. Embassy in Bangladesh, to please come up. Requesting Mr. Andrew Martin, Executive Vice President of Sustainable Apparel Coalition, to come up. Requesting Mr. Rory McCarthy, Head of Partnership Development of WaterAid UK, to come up. And finally, I would like to request Ms. Jasmine Malik Chua, Sourcing and Labor Editing Sourcing Journal, to please come up as well. And to moderate the session, I would like to request Mr. Mohammad Anis Agung Nugroho, Program Manager of Better Work Bangladesh, to please come up.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon. I hope it's still morning because I'm expecting some energize as well from the participants. Thank you so much for having us today. Unfortunately, we are still waiting for Mr. Fayaz, representing government of Bangladesh. Today we have a panel session with very the one who knows very well about the mandatory human rights due diligence. And I think I want to also explain a bit why ILO and one of his program, Better Work, is actually working on the human rights due diligence, because all of this regulation is actually also referred to the ILO convention. Yeah, that's why we are promoting it. We are also working on it, and we also help the industry to comply with the regulation. In the 45 minutes, I will ask, hopefully, 2 rounds of questions. The first question will be different according to your background and expertise. But in the second round, we will have asking you, what is your suggestion in general to Bangladesh government, Bangladesh business and workers to address the new mandatory human rights due diligence. But let me start with Bern. Bern, how is all of this conversation now is because of the new EU directive on the due diligence. Where is it now? Was it coming? What is new? And yeah, what is it different to what previously we have? Please.
Okay, thank you, and pleasure to be here, and Anis, to answer your question. First, let me make a statement. I mean, I believe that international supply chains are good for economic development. Coming from an organization, we're not a Marxist organization, not at all. I believe that globalization and supply chains have brought millions out of poverty in the past decades, and have benefited people all over the world. The EU itself is basically, trade is in the EU's DNA. We are pretty much a trade organization when we came into being. So in general, I believe this is a good thing. Globalization, supply chains, as a starter. But let's face it, international supply chains have also been blamed for having many negative effects on people and the environment. And what I mean by that is that some suppliers have adopted a race to the bottom pricing strategy. And this is among the reasons why supply chains have, to a certain extent, came into disregard, have become a bad reputation. And for a long time, early 2000s, the buzzword in business and international economy was self-regulation. And the logic behind self-regulation was that multinational companies, if they applied a voluntary code of conduct on due diligence, and they would do that because of reputational issues. And that was a bit like the mantra for quite a long time. And then Rana Plaza happened, 2013. And recently we had the pandemic. And that reminded us repeatedly that voluntary codes of conduct do not work. And in Europe, NGOs and trade unions have repeatedly said that. And they've been pointing this out for a long time. As a result, the EU, let's say better late than never, has come up with its due diligence directive at international level, because we believe that international trade and supply chains needs rules. So the new EU directive was presented in February last year, and it defines binding rules for everyone. And this in both the social and in the environmental sector. And more importantly, it's mandatory in its application. So since it's legally binding, brands and buyers from the EU and third countries can be held accountable for their suppliers and also bear responsibility for the consequences of their suppliers' treatment of workers and the environment. So what does the directive do? Companies will have to assess their supply chains at least once a year or ahead of major business decisions, and they have to comply with requirements that relate to, let's say, forced labor, child labor, inadequate workplace safety, and environmental impacts. Some sectors, such as the garment sector, agriculture, forestry, and minerals are subject to particular vigilance, given that these sectors have a long history of violating labor and environmental standards, unfortunately. Now, if companies fail to comply, penalties and legal actions would follow. So this, in a nutshell, is what the EU Due Diligence Directive is all about. It's different in the voluntary schemes like we have seen from the UN, from the ILO, and from OECD. We want to make these rules mandatory and legally enforceable. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernd. That's why some experts also call it like hard laws, yeah, because it will be binding and mandatory. We are going to have a little bit of interaction, but we will not showing now. So the team in the behind, do you mind to show the Twitter account that you can follow? And you can also ask the question. So through Twitter, we will not be able to respond now, but Bernd, for example, has been very active on Twitter, and everyone here also have a Twitter. We even do a Twitter this morning. I saw some of you. So if you have any question, you can just drop a Twitter, mention them, mention all of this account, and then, yeah, they will respond on Twitter. Farouk Bhai, from the screen, can you show the Twitter account? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Here's the Twitter account, yeah. Please tag them and then ask the question there. Now, I'm going to go to Rory McCarthy because water is also a human rights. But what we want to ask today is, so far everyone, although the conference is focusing on the garment and RMG, but what can this industry learn from other industry? Yeah.
Thank you, Enis, and thank you to the organizers for putting on this fantastic event and having us here to speak. My name is Rory McCarthy. I'm here with WaterAid. WaterAid's probably marginally less well known than the EU, so a bit of an introduction. We're an international NGO working in 34 countries globally, and our mission is to ensure that everyone everywhere has access to clean water, decent toilets, and good hygiene. WaterAid's entry point into this topic of mandatory human rights due diligence stems from the fact that in 2010, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution that said that the human rights to water and the human rights to sanitation are not only fundamental human rights, but they're also essential to the full enjoyment of life and all other rights. It's been 13 years since that resolution was made, and we sit at the midway point between the date we set and the date we aim to achieve, the UN SDGs. But yet, 2 billion people in the world don't have access to clean water. 3.6 billion people don't have a toilet of their own at home. And WaterAid believes in the power of partnerships to solve these challenges. Partnerships with communities, partnerships with government, partnerships with other NGOs, and partnerships with the private sector. And before I touch on your question, I just think it's a point to acknowledge the progress that's been made on this topic, in this sector, in Bangladesh. WaterAid is deeply appreciative of the policies that have been put in place by the Bangladesh government that align to the human right to water and sanitation. And similarly, through the Labour Act in 2015, the policies put in place for the private sector about what that means for the use of water within industry. So, rights to abstraction of groundwater, access to clean water for workers. And equally, as we can see, the private sector has been putting these policies into practice, and credit where credit is due. We've seen a lot of progress. But to touch on your point about learnings from other industries, WaterAid works a lot with the agriculture industry as well as the apparel sector. The agriculture industry is responsible for 70% of freshwater withdrawals globally. Massive water user, huge risk as we're seeing variable rainfall and other shocks related to climate change. And one of the key commodities that we work with is the tea sector, and they have their own plethora of challenges that are related to them. One of them being they have a large workforce that are often low paid and have lack of access to being able to realize their rights. We work with tea estates in India, Kenya, but also here in Bangladesh. And WaterAid's work with the tea plantations in Bangladesh has been to help tea picker workers to understand and advocate for their human rights to water and sanitation, whilst simultaneously working with the landowners and tea plantation managers to understand and appreciate more the benefits that their business will have from actually from their workers being happy and healthy and having access to these resources. WaterAid has, through this work, reached 45,000 people in 21 tea plantations. That's 45,000 people that were being denied their right to human water and sanitation, and businesses that they were employing that were exposed to that risk. And the learning here that I think for the apparel industry is that use your workers, listen to your workers, let them advocate for their rights, protect their human rights for them and their families, but also to protect your business. Because by tackling these issues, you're protecting your business from any potential repercussions that may or may not come from existing or upcoming legislation that's being put in place. So yeah.
Thank you, Rory. I'm moving now to Lina Khan, Labor Attaché of the U.S. Embassy in Bangladesh. When it's emerging, you know, I try to learn a little bit. Is it really new? Is there any older law that are implemented so far? And then I heard about this information in the other country where the U.S. government actually has not, we don't call it like mandatory human or HRDD laws, but actually you have a law that prohibits importing any product that was mined, produced, manufactured by forced labor, including child labor. So what is U.S. experience on this law, please?
Thank you very much, Anis, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here today to speak on this panel. And just to start out, you know, globally we are seeing this trend towards from voluntary to mandatory due diligence on labor rights, human rights, the environment, which I think is really incredibly encouraging and positive. And just to start off, I just think it's important for any discussion around mandatory human rights due diligence to really first and foremost keep in mind the ILO fundamental conventions on freedom of association, collective bargaining, prevention of forced labor, child labor, discrimination, and ensuring a safe workplace. As you correctly mentioned, in the US we do have a law. We have aspects of mandatory due diligence, particularly in relation to trade enforcement. The US Department of Labor, where I come from, enforces strong labor protections in our free trade agreements, such as the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, as well as through our trade preference programs, such as the Generalized System of Preferences. And we also have the Tariff Act of 1930, as well as the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, the UFLPA. So what is the background of the US Tariff Act? Well, first of all, prohibiting the importation of goods made with forced labor is a key component of the Biden administration's worker-centered trade policy. But the US has prohibited the import of goods made with convict labor since 1890. And in 1930, our US Congress expanded this prohibition to Section 307 of the Tariff Act, and that includes products made with forced labor. The US Customs Border Protection Agency, also known as the CBP, they are responsible for enforcing Section 307 of the Tariff Act. And through this law, the US has been working to counter labor abuses globally, preventing goods made with forced labor from entering US commerce. And the Tariff Act is also responsible for holding companies accountable for violating labor rights around the world. And I just wanted to mention that since 2015, the CBP has increasingly used Section 307 of the Tariff Act, given the heightened attention and scrutiny to worker rights in the trade policy space. As far as how is the US enforcing this law, well, the US Customs and Border Protection, they enforce the law through investigations and by issuing a withhold release order, also known as a WRO. Either an individual or an organization may petition to the CBP alleging forced labor in the production of certain goods. There is a relatively low evidentiary threshold, so this remedy is quite accessible. I don't know if you'd be interested in data around this issue, but in case folks are wondering about the number of countries and companies that have been investigated or sanctioned by this law, there is information on both of those aspects on the cbp.gov website. And I just wanted to mention that there are currently 53 active withhold release orders against specific companies from 11 different countries. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. Yeah, that was experience from the USA who has this law since 1930, but then implemented in 2015. If you have question to Bern, Rory, or Lina, please mention their Twitter account. Do you mind to show again the Twitter account, just to make sure that you know that we are going to have an interactive session through social media? Yeah. Please show it on the screen again. And then I move now to Andrew Martin. Okay, now we have a new law. I mean, coming soon, yeah, and which will impact to the supply chain, not only the garments, but it's beyond garment as well, Andrew. What is the discussion and reaction among the member of SAC? Are they excited? Are they, what do they see? How do they see about this? Yeah, do you mind to give us some intel from inside, please?
Okay, yeah, so we're amongst friends, okay? So whatever I tell you, don't repeat outside of this room. No, thank you for that. Firstly, thank you very much for the invite. Fantastic job, Sustainable Apparel Forum and Mustafi, so really privileged to be here. What's the conversation? I think, I'm sort of jumping the question. We have had members starting, obviously talking a lot about it, coming together, talking to us. It's like anything. we represent nearly 45% of the industry. So we have a variety of members at different stages in the journey. We have a variety of members, some of whom have very effective due diligence processes in place, some of which are really at the beginning of the journey. And they're all coming at it from slightly different aspects. I think one of the things I would say is a voluntary initiative, and we're saying it more and more, we actually really welcome the more approaches to mandatory regulation, because it creates a much clearer framework, a much clearer level playing field for people. So as an organization, and I would say a lot of our members are really welcoming good mandatory due diligence regulation. The conversations that are going on are quite mixed. There's a few conversations, one of which is around some who are more progressive are actually saying, okay, what does this mean for our resources? Does it mean we're going to be moving to more compliance and away from some of the work that we're already doing? What do we need to do to get there? What are the solutions that are out there to help us, support us in delivering on the due diligence regulation and looking for solutions? To which my response very often is, and I think this is an interesting journey for the voluntary initiatives, is we've done so much, had some success, nowhere near enough success, nowhere near, but have some. Some of that success has come in creating tools, methodologies, frameworks based on things like the ILO conventions, the UN guiding principles, the OECD guidelines. So in some ways, some of the methods and the tools are there to be able to accelerate this. If we actually, there's some of the tools are there if we get the regulation right. So I think that's one piece that's happening. I think there's a concern around ensuring that the regulation that finally hits, and whether it's the EU corporate sustainability, or as I heard it in the OECD meeting the other week, CSDDD is apparently what I heard for the first time. Whether it's that or the due diligence regulation, there are certain things that are critical. And that is making sure that it does follow those guidelines. It is risk-based and not ambiguous. I mean, there's some ambiguous language at the moment around relationship-based rather than risk-based. I think it does align, which leads me to the alignment piece. And the other thing that's become more important for the SAC, because the SAC represents brands, retailers, and manufacturers, is that actually the focus on purchasing practices within the context of due diligence is actually critical, and making sure that's there. We actually sent a note signed a joint letter with Fairwear Foundation, Amphori, STTI, ETI, and Transformers Foundation, really requesting these things, including we need to have something on purchasing practices. The SAC's just launched our latest HIG BRM, brand and retail module, for the brands and retailers, where we've collaborated with a common framework on purchasing practices to try and make sure there's some alignment on that. And I think that's going to be critical in there. There was a couple of other things I wanted to quickly say. You jump me if I still got a minute. Good. I think, I think actually the last thing I'll close with on that question is when it comes to regulation, and this comes again and again and again, harmonization, again and again. Harmonization, and we heard it this morning, and I'm going to cheat and use some quotes from this morning, which were Salim from KDS. Firstly, harmonization and practical implementable regulation. Salim from KDS said, government's responsibilities is to ensure that parties can comply on due diligence regulation. Farouk from BGMEA said, his wish list, we do not want country-specific regulation. We need convergence across countries and regions. It's essential. We need to create a level playing field, and we need purchasing practices to be standardized. I think that piece around harmonization is so important, because it then means, it actually sets a bar for everybody. It means there's a level playing field. It means that people are actually working from the same place, and there is nowhere to escape. One concern I do have at the moment, and it's an ongoing one that we have often with the EU regulations, this is a directive. And as a directive, there is the possibility for different interpretations. I think it's a big step forward, but I think you might be surprised, the SAC, we'd be wanting this to be actually full regulation and not a directive, because the directive creates the possibility for, what was it, a critic of ours called a minestrone of approaches, that you could have different approaches to how it's interpreted. So, harmonization and practical implementable. So that's kind of the conversations we've got going on. it's happening. We need to make it work because it's critical.
Thank you, Andrew. I will ask Bern response, if possible, after Yasmin on the harmonization, clear directive. But Yasmin, I've just checked your Twitter and you pin one of the tweet that every fashion story is a labor story, right? So let's see how you're passionate about fashion and also labor story. But looking at the RMG industry, who has been heavy with audit as an audit industry since beginning 2000s, what do you see so far since 2000 until 2022? Do you agree with Andrew, for example, that there has been a lot of tools, methodology, success, but I think Bern also mentioned that the voluntary work is not as good as need something further. Do you see that this is already in the track? Are we on the right direction, do you think? Please.
Okay, let me try to, there are a few things there, so I'm trying to parse them all. I feel like a bit of an imposter because I speak to experts. I'm not an expert myself because I'm just a journalist. But let's start with what we talk about voluntary mechanisms. I think a lot of what we consider human rights due diligence is already on the cards. It's in the UN guiding principles and the OECD, but what we lack is a method of enforcement. And I think that's where legislation can come in. And something that, in my experience, that comes up a lot is the topic of wages. I write a lot about garment workers because, you know, we talk about supply chain risks and supply chain mitigation, but the supply chain isn't just products, it's people. And that's something I feel very strongly about. Wages, chronically low wages, have been a real sticking point right now. I know that people I've spoke with and on the NGO side say that, you know, low wages, they're a feature, they're why this industry can go on the way it can with this constant race to the bottom. And I know with the directive, there is a sense that living wages and incomes should be included because they're a human right, right? Everyone has the human right to a living wage. But we also know that meeting minimum wages can be a challenge. You know, we're talking about post-COVID, we're in the middle of a global economic crisis, and then as Andrew said, purchasing practices are a driving factor. I just wanted to bring up a study in January. The University of Aberdeen and Transform Trade published a survey of 1,000 manufacturers from Bangladesh, and they found that 76% were selling at the same price in December 2021 than they were in March 2020, despite the rising cost of raw materials. 8% were doing for less than they cost to make. And we're talking about major retailers. I'm not gonna name and shame right now, but they're exactly who you would expect. As a result, 1 in 5 of the manufacturers said they struggle to pay the minimum wage. So if we're at that stage now where we can't even meet that goalpost, how are we going to get to a living wage? And that is something that I think the industry really needs to grapple with. And I think it does come down to purchasing practices. In New York, for example, we have a bill that's in the work. It's called the Fashion Sustainability and Social Accountability Act that will affect retailers making at least $100 million in revenue. And it's now including a requirement for responsible purchasing practices. So I know there's a real appetite to see this in the EU as well. I think I shall stop there unless you want me to keep going. I could probably just go on.
Yeah, but do you think the new conversation, the emerging mandatory human rights due diligence is on the right track as well to help all of those problems?
I know it's a start, right? It's a start, but there has been some criticisms from NGOs. I know there's one concern that the requirements of the directive with the threshold that it's at, that it might just cover 1% of businesses. And there is a real fear that as it moves down the legislative process, it will get watered down. So I think that's still, to be determined. I spoke with Laura Walters, the Dutch MEP who drafted the report that became the basis for the directive. She said that what worries her most is that the directive becomes a paper tiger. She said the worst thing we could do is make a law that essentially takes us a step back. And so I think as the negotiations carry through, I think it's really important to remember this. And there are sources of improvement that the NGOs have brought up, like a mechanism for redress for rights holders who have been victimized. Are they able to? Are authorities during the investigation process, are they engaging with workers and their representatives, giving the workers their voice? Access to justice is really important, as well as lowering the burden of proof and protecting whistleblowers, because retaliation is a very strong concern among garment workers.
Retaliation, yeah.
Yeah. And I think one final piece that recently came up during International Women's Day is that the directive should be gender responsive, because women especially are more likely to rely on semi-formal or informal relationship schemes, unofficial subcontracting, and home-based work, and those relationships are not currently covered by the directive. So that's something that could be taken into account as well.
Yeah, thank you, Yasmin. And I think, welcome, Mr. Fayaz. Sorry we start already, but I think it's a good on timing as well, because I think now we are in the second round of the question, and it will be, the question is about, to the panel is about what is the suggestion to Bangladesh government, business and workers to address the emerging mandatory human rights due diligence. And I would like to invite Lina first to respond, and then we would like to have last comments from Mr. Fayaz at the end. Yeah, please, Lina.
Well, thank you very much for the question.
Please, Lina.
Thank you. I think, the post-pandemic environment has really shined a spotlight on the need for all stakeholders, governments, businesses, and trade unions to work together, not just to come together, but to work better to address labor violations in our globally connected supply chains. Starting with the government of Bangladesh, I would recommend, first of all, strengthening the enabling environment for labor protections. And that would be through labor law reforms that are ongoing right now, through the Bangladesh Labor Act, as well as through the Export Processing Zone Labor Act. And importantly, implementation, ensuring that trade unions are actually able to register and without fear of retribution or reprisal, and as well as enforcement of the labor laws through labor inspections. I think strong protections are also necessary to communicate more broadly to the international community that Bangladesh can be a real leader when it comes to strong labor rights. And that would not only help prevent future issues around sanctions, but also would unlock greater economic opportunities. For businesses, I would say that as the US and the EU are moving toward creating a more equal playing field through due diligence and strengthened enforcement mechanisms, we would like to see the development of a legally binding and enforceable agreement between brands, suppliers, and worker organizations. And I would just like to briefly mention the 2022 Dindigul Agreement from Tamil Nadu, which was an enforceable binding agreement and really a great example of collaboration between an international brand, suppliers, and unions to address gender-based violence and improve labor rights in the garment sector. And then also I just wanted to highlight that as a result of that binding agreement, the US Customs Border Protection found that the supplier had actually addressed the concerns around forced labor, and they lifted the WRO against the manufacturer. So I think that's a really interesting example that
so it's also bring benefit as well,
exactly.
when you can address it rightly. Thank you, Lina.
Thank you.
Bern.
Yeah, there's one point I wanted to make. there's a much bigger picture to due diligence than just compliance. It's about reputation. It's about branding. And take the example of Rana Plaza, which was pretty much 9/11 for Bangladesh, and the reputational damage it done. What did Bangladesh do? What did the buyers do? We had the accord. We had major improvements. So you had this disaster, but you turned it around. So where are we now? Bangladesh is now world leader in green factories. And I'm thinking, in due diligence, why not do the same? Why not become a world leader in due diligence? Why not? This is a reputational issue and a branding opportunity. And I just want to stop here. Thank you.
But Bern, is there any suggestion as well from the government and also for the government of Bangladesh, for the businesses Bangladesh? I think for the business, you mentioned it rightly about, turn it into an opportunity, right? And also workers. Is there any suggestion, is there any advice for them to address this, especially for the government of Bangladesh?
I think EU has been working with the government of Bangladesh on the national labor law, and there have been a lot of reforms initiated, and my message would just keep going, keep implementing what we have been working on. And if this is going to happen, I think we are seeing a much brighter picture when it comes to labor rights. But keep on implementing, keep on going, and think about the reputational gain you can have in the future.
Thank you, Bern. Please, Rory, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Bern's point about the fact that Bangladesh has put themselves at the forefront. They've got almost 200 green factories. And it's about, I think I've heard conversations around the need to promote this, and I have to see the role of the consumer in this process as well, because it's not just the brands, not just the manufacturers, not just the workers, but also it's about communication to consumers as well, and using the power of media to actually to tell a story about this, and use partners who are able to do that as well. I mean, international organizations like WaterAid, for example, but there are many others, have a direct means of communication with the general public in these markets. So I think use them as a way to actually communicate the success story of Bangladesh and the work that we're doing, and yeah, to use the power of media for that, for the benefits of that.
Thank you, Rory. Andrew and Yasmin, do you have anything to add? Suggestion to Bangladesh?
I'll be quick.
Please.
I know we're running time. Just one quick thought that came rather than repeating all of that was, and I love what you said about Bangladesh being a model for human rights due diligence, is actually look at the regulation that's coming up and bring together different stakeholders and use it as a vehicle to look at how you can improve things, and use it as a framework, as a way of actually going, this is coming, so if you bring the different stakeholders together, manufacturers, brands, NGOs, civil society together, and if the government can play a role in that as well, and actually look at the law and go, how do we make this work? Rather than see it as an imposition, see it as an opportunity, as a way of driving things forward. I think there's great opportunity in that. And I'm a great believer that if we do that and we look at finding the common ground where we can come together on that and do that, we can make it work, but avoid the adversarial approach that comes together and then goes pointing fingers. And so that's my one piece on it.
Thank you, Andrew. And I don't think we start from the scratch, right? We have some already start. Yasmin?
Yeah.
And then I'll give it to Mr. Fayaz.
Yeah, the clock is very intimidating. But just to jump on what Lena said, the thing with the Dougal agreement, which is also based on similar agreements in Lesotho, is that they're worker-led. And I think that's, instead of a top-down approach, you're actually engaging the people it affects the most and asking them what needs to be done. And I think that makes for a far more effective scheme. So freedom of association, I believe, is so important. Listening to the workers, not treating them as units of productivity, but as partners, because that's what they really are.
Thank you. So, Mr. Fayaz, you have the last 7 minutes, and basically, I think so far we discussed a lot about the new human rights due diligence merging, but it's also not really new because it's been implemented as well. And then I think we see a lot of message to Bangladesh is to work at the policy level and also at the sector level. Please respond. Your response, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I'm so late. Actually, I kind of dug my own grave here. I looked at the program overview and was telling Mustafiz that I don't see anyone from Bangladesh in this panel on human rights due diligence. And then he kept insisting that I join this conversation. And so I couldn't say no to Mustafiz, and here I am, and very impressed to see this big gathering. I mean, throughout the day, you have been listening to these conversations, and you're still here. That means something. So that's very encouraging. I got the last part of the interventions extremely useful. We are kind of familiar with these issues. We are definitely working with our partners on a lot of these issues, so I will not go into repeating those. Just to make 5 quick points. I mean, first of all, human rights is something that we in Bangladesh, we own as our own. I mean, human rights is not something that is imposed on us by the Western world. I mean, please do not have any such notion. I mean, this is a country that was born because we wanted to secure our political and economic rights. So human rights remains a part of our DNA, and we should not feel in any way defensive or apologetic about our human rights standards and performance. That should be a message that should resonate with our social partners as well. That's the first point. Thank you for that encouragement. Second point, I mean, the government would like to work along with our social partners and other development partners to improve the situation of our workers, to score better in terms of due diligence. But what we would also expect from our international friends is a bit of trust in us. I mean, when we engage with our friends, we often see that there is this lack of trust in our ability to make changes. And that really hurts. At times, it reeks of sheer condescension, that as if we are not able to do the right thing. Just let me give 2 examples. Somebody mentioned the RMG Sustainability Council. After Accord was exhausted, the business sector came up with the idea of the RMG Sustainability Council. But there was so much mistrust about this whole mechanism. It was quite hurtful, to be very honest. And it was actually our judiciary, our apex court, that had said that Accord cannot continue to operate in this country. And we don't know, just because it's the judiciary of Bangladesh, that's why it has to be ignored or discarded. That really hurts our feeling. We do have an established judiciary system, and when we are telling our development partners that please do respect that, and still we hear that no, I mean, RMG would be, RSC would be subject to influence and misgovernance and so forth, that does not really help us in pushing things forward. As a government, we have to get that trust. So please bear with us on that. The second thing is about tripartite consultation. We are ready to work on all kinds of legal or policy reforms, but the government maintains that we have to take it through tripartite consultations. Now, often we engage with our international partners and they seem to suggest that why can't the government push through some of the reforms? We just can't, because there are strong voices from the employers and from the workers. And we are bound by ILO standards that we will have to operate through these social dialogue mechanisms, these tripartite mechanisms. So again, our request to our international friends, please make up your mind. I mean, at times you allege that we are being authoritarian, where we do not deserve such allegations. On the other hand, you are telling us that why do we have to pay attention to the tripartite mechanism and why cannot the government ramrod some of the reform initiatives? I mean, we cannot reconcile with these. So again, since many of our friends are here, this would be our request that please have some trust in our government. We have been delivering on many of our international commitments, and our political leadership has set very grand visions, and we remain committed to do that. So as part of that, the more we have your trust and understanding about these things, the better it would be to take forward our work. ILO is, of course, one of our close partners. But again, there is an unfortunate fact. I mean, the workers group in ILO, they have been taking us almost for a ride. We use the word forum shopping. They have filed this case and that case against Bangladesh. In most of the cases, they could not sustain it. So currently, they have used the last resort, the complaint under Article 26, which is very unfortunate. And I hope some of our worker colleagues are here. This is not to blame the workers' representation in ILO, but we are continuously being subjected to this. And we often say this, that if we want to talk to our employers, we know that there is Bangladesh Employers Federation. I'm sure there are many shades of views there, but at least they stand on the same platform. But when we try to speak to our worker colleagues, it's such a fractious landscape. We just cannot interact with them. Even, people, delegates, representatives of workers who enjoy confidence of capitals like Washington and Brussels, even they do not sit with each other, unfortunately. We tried to have a conversation with some of those people, but we were given a condition that you cannot invite one if the other is present. That is not a healthy situation. But who are we going to tell this to? I cannot say this in Geneva, so I'm using this platform to share this frustration. But please help us. I think our industry leaders are continuously saying that more than the number of trade unions, we need quality trade unions. Mm-hmm. And because of the legacy of trade unionism we have in this country, there are certain misgivings about that. So if you can actually help us with that, please, we would be most open to those suggestions. Last point, I just heard our US colleague use the word sanctions. Yes, that's probably the elephant in the room, but no, we are not scared. We are used to all these kind of things. But again, just to share a bit of frustration, that in 2016, the US government decided to withdraw, to restore the GSP facilities for Myanmar and withdrew all kinds of sanctions against Myanmar. And 2017, the Myanmar regime committed what is now generally accepted as genocide. But since 2013, the US government has withdrawn GSP from Bangladesh. We do not even qualify for treatment that is given to a country that has committed textbook example of ethnic cleansing and genocide. So these are kind of things that do not really help get the conversation forward. We are just coming back from the LDC conference, UN LDC conference in Doha. There, the figures were being shown that Bangladesh has been able to utilize 75% of LDC-specific trade benefits. In case of EU, I think it's almost 98%. But why we are 75% globally? Because, again, our friends from the US did not agree to provide duty-free and quota-free access to all products from all LDCs as they have committed under the Doha development round. For some reason, which is inexplicable to us, they resorted to kind of a divide and rule policy within the LDC group and said that the Asian LDCs are too competitive, so we do not deserve duty-free, quota-free access. It would apparently hurt our African brothers and sisters. Yeah. So this is the kind of situation we have to operate in. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to set that scene a little bit, not complaining about anything, but just to make sure that we are working together with ILO and we are working together with the European Union. Yeah. We will be continuing to do our job.
Thank you.
But please do not threaten us with sanctions and punitive actions.
Thank you.
That helps build trust.
Do you want to make a comment? Yeah, please. Just 1 minute because we the clock is off now. So please just briefly.
Thank you. Very briefly, I just wanted to address the point on the generalized system of preferences. Please. Just to clarify, the GSP program in the United States has actually lapsed as of January 1st of last year. So the points you make around Burma are very valid. We would not disagree with that whatsoever. And just to clarify that no countries under the current lapse are receiving GSP benefits. And the United States has been very clear and unequivocal about the situation in Burma, and we certainly stand by that. So I just wanted to clarify that they're not getting benefits.
Thank you, Lina. I think the time is off now. I would like to ask your applause to all of these panelists because it's been very interesting and how you enjoy it.